people, pilots, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, they had a small restaurant. So all of the epicenter of all of the activity out there was out in the middle of the desert, out in the middle of nowhere. And so the activity would be extraordinary. Is that I would see all this. I mean, of course, once when you talk about my early memories of him, was primarily it was always a mystery because. Like, for instance, I would walk from my grandmother's house, which is where we live, out to across the desert, and I would go to the restaurant. I'd go inside the restaurant, and there would be the place would be filled with military men, and then there would be airplanes and pilots all sitting around talking with my uncle. Okay, and I never could figure out, well, what are they doing there, and why are they talking to my uncle, and why were there helicopters? And why were there military? Why was the military there? Well, I didn't find out till later. Everything is kind of I find out later what he was doing was he was essentially the chaplain of the whole UFO movement, because anybody that had any commercial pilot or any military pilot, what they would do is after they had a contact up in the air, it would completely create such an issue with them because they couldn't really talk about it to their superiors because, what would have happened, they would have been grounded. And what would happen is literally it would do a number on their heads. And my uncle was known as a ufologist. He'd identified 105 different alien species. He'd written books. He'd been on TV. So my early memories is all these people around that I had no idea why they were there, and I didn't find out that till later. So everything is kind of like, okay, and so it was kind of like an amazing thing. And other than that, I mean, I would see my uncle on television, which was an amazing thing, and or I would see him, or I'd listen to him on the radio. I would, if you can imagine a small child listening to a radio, AM radio, listening to his uncle out of New York at the Long John Neville Show, which at the time,
right,
the Long John Neville Show, radio show, was the precursor. Larry King actually took it over, but Long John Neville had the #1 ratings in the country. And my uncle, and you mentioned Adamski and all these various eclectic people, they were frequent guests with the likes of Jackie Gleason and all these other celebrities that would get in. They would actually have this chat show, and my uncle would be right in the middle of this whole thing. So my early memories was I was essentially starstruck. I couldn't. I'm figuring, okay, what's wrong with this picture? We're all kind of like little desert rats living out in the middle of nowhere, and my uncle is this, larger than life personality talking about, ufology and spaceships and things like that, and his own experiences. So that was my early impression.
Oh man, Chad, I can. The pictures in my mind, it's like a movie trailer going through my head right now.
It is
talking about this. You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking of the movie The Right Stuff.
Right. Oh, sure.
The small bar out in the middle of the desert next to the airport, and you as a young child just skipping down the road, going from your grandmother's house to the restaurant at the airport, hanging out and opening the door and finding out all these test pilots are sitting around there.
Exactly.
And kind of like, shooting the ball, having a drink, and blowing off steam. And then your uncle is there in the corner, secretly talking with some of these young buck guys about what they've seen and basically being their confidant, it sounds like.
Absolutely. It's like Chuck Yeager. I'm looking for Chuck Yeager in this whole scheme of things, I mean, really, it is fascinating. No, you've actually you pinpointed as far as that and what have you. So consequently, when I was writing the screenplay, it was fairly. I mean, it just kind of rolled off because it was pretty much off memory, and even though I've taken a lot of dramatic license with Giant Rock, the novel, and of course Giant Rock, the movie, the screenplay. It's actually based on actual events, including my own self, which is the other thing too. It's a really, the story is of course, my uncle is the star because essentially he was, but it also I included my own self as a character named Chase, because I couldn't talk about this stuff, and so actually it was almost cathartic when I was writing this thing, so I could get some of my own stuff as far as being close by that. I had my own abduction experience out there, coming across the desert. I had multiple abduction experiences. I had one, the first one, I was literally taken out of my bed and literally transported through glass and literally, and I was brought to a ship, and I experienced the small grays doing various experiments on me, et cetera, et cetera. It's 20 feet away, and so I had my own experiences as far as that, and I couldn't talk about this stuff. I could never talk about it until I got it in writing, and it was cathartic. And actually, I never felt better in my life, than when I started writing about this stuff, because it was driving me crazy as far as the stuff goes. And I think, how do I say this? Well, you get it. And the other thing too is people always say, "Well, did you talk to your uncle about it?" And I thought my uncle was partially responsible, because for some, he held meetings inside of this 8-story displaced boulder that was carved out, and on Friday he would do these transmission or channeling sessions. Life magazine had did a profile on him. He actually had the cover of it, and they asked him, "Well, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, it's like a channel. I get these transmission, and from these extraterrestrials, and they give me information about various things." Well, that's the whole word of channeling, which my uncle he chafed at it, because it wasn't like a seance or anything like that. He was getting this transmission data into his brain. It was actually being very similar to Philip K. Dick, which I don't know how much I've since learned about him and how he received all his information, which most science fiction movies are based on his experience with extraterrestrials, and and we talk about the Minority Report, and all these various movies that we've been seeing that are based on Philip K. Dick's experiences in his books. Well, that's what he claimed also too, and as far as experiences stuff here. Well, at the same time, I've had the same experiences too, not only with that, along with that, but also experiencing parallel universes. So, at any rate, so all this stuff, all this information that I've been able to cure has been somewhat good, because literally the veil of the whole mystery of how all this stuff works and comes together, it's not as outlandish as it once seemed, or the mystery is starting to unfold, and I'm starting to understand as far as some of the events that happened now. But like I said, I thought my uncle, because of his contact, and he was one of the original channelers of an entity called Ashtar Command. Now, I don't know if some of your listeners are out there. There's a whole community called Ashtar, okay, that's on the internet. Well, my uncle was the first one to channel this extraterrestrial named Ashtar, and he was the first one to do that. Now, so I assumed that my uncle was in league with all of these extraterrestrials, and I thought my experiences and my abductions were somehow related to his activity, because of his, of all the activities. So I never really liked it. I didn't, and he knew. The other thing too was frightening for me was he actually knew that something was going on with me as far as these various events that occurred. And he would tell me, he goes, "What's going on? What's going on?" And it was always probing, and I just simply didn't want to, I just didn't want to talk about it. But anyways, so that's one of the questions that people ask me. Well, did you tell your uncle, who was the greatest counselor in the world? I said, hell no. I thought he was the cause of it. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, we've all heard those stories about the whole idea, Chad, where this thing seems to be following a line of, a succession, following from family member down to, children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews and stuff. So you wonder whether they had your brainwaves, your DNA, they were following you and kind of keeping tabs on you.
Well, I think so, and I've actually come to that conclusion. Now, incidentally, the stress of being a contactee or being abducted is extraordinary, and it's something that people. I have to laugh at some of the questions I've got. I did Eminem's radio show, which he's a rap artist, and some of the guys asked me, well, how do you get abducted? I want to be abducted. And that was one of the comments. And they said, how do you become abducted? I said, well, what you do is you go out in the desert and you sing and chant and you stand on one leg, and then a UFO will come by. And it was like dead silence over the radio, and I have to laugh about it. And he goes, well, what happens if it doesn't work? I said, you change legs. It just came to me. I was kind of having fun with them, because it's like people say, oh, I would like to have this experience. Well, I'm not really sure that you do, because they're just, it's extraordinary. And again, you can't, you become almost fragmented. And my theory right now is the most abductees and people that are in contact with us are somehow, in many respects, genetically altered. There's something different that occurs. Now, my abduction experience happened. The telepathically, they said this won't hurt, and you won't remember this, and et cetera, and which were all lies, because it happened to me when I was 4 years old, and the next day I had a extreme high temperature, and I stuttered profusely for 6 months. I couldn't keep a sentence together. So there was something that went on with that, as far as that. So that was my experience, my first experience, and so I had them all the way up until I was 10 years old, and then they essentially subsided, at least to my own knowledge, but there's another chapter of that too. So, but they became a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, and now my cousin, who is George's grandson, Sean, he actually ended up killing himself because of some of the trauma of the abductions and the experiences that we all had out there. And so it was really a phenomenon. I mean, truly a phenomenon that I can't. It's that when I say Giant Rock, it's the greatest UFO story never told. I truly mean that. I mean that. I really mean that. With readers, when they read my book, they zip through it in about 2 hours, because it happens. It just moves really quick. So, but it really is the greatest UFO story never told. Now we've been hearing, I got to watch Project Blue Book, that's been on, and they've rebooted Roswell, on that. So it's becoming more and more things. But this is one story that, when you put together all the various particulars as far as of this, with the not only the FBI, who basically were just persecuting my uncle. I mean, the government was literally coming out, when you talk about interference and what have you, they were very fearful of my uncle and his experiences and his ability to articulate it, because he would go to colleges and he would, just as a matter of fact, explain what was going on, and would explain, just like, and they were very frightened of him. I guess awakening some of the consciousness of some of the people in college. And then on top of that, every year there was this annual UFO space convention that literally was the who's who. This is prior to Contact in the Desert, or whatever they got going on right now. There were literally tens of thousands of people out in the middle of the desert from all over the world that would come there. And the movement was really growing especially during the 60s, the early 60s. It was really growing. And the government was they were very fearful of my uncle, and thought that that would be somehow harming the the population, what have you. Which if most of the people who are out there, they know about this